If you are only tracking downloads, you are missing the point of having a podcast. There are so many other things that we really should be tracking, but it really goes back to understanding what our goal is. Today, we're going to be going through how to understand if your podcast is successful and some of those metrics that are going to help you understand if things are working or if they're not. Welcome to Podcasting Unlocked, the show for purpose-driven podcasters. I'm Alicia Galati, founder of Galati Media, and I'm here to share actionable strategies to help you amplify your message and grow your audience. Hey friends, welcome back. I'm so excited about this conversation. This is a topic that I have been hearing a lot lately. We had a client recently launch a few months ago, and I don't want to be too specific depending on when you're listening to this, but she launched 2 months ago and she was seeing some of her other podcasting friends sharing their success. And one of the friends shared that they were in the top 10% globally in the first year. And then they posted about how many impressions they had for their podcast. And what I found so interesting about this is that my client, she's sending me this email and she's like, hey, do I need to hire a PR firm to achieve this? Because people who are not in the podcasting space don't really know what is good success or what success really looks like. And so I had to tell her, wait a minute. First of all, no. With a very small podcast, you should be able to get that within the first 6 to 9 months. But with an even, one that is as prominent as yours, guests that are as prominent as yours, you should get it a lot quicker. And lo and behold, within a month and a half, she had hit the top 10% of podcasts worldwide. And the rest of us who are regular podcasters are like, so what? Like, big deal. That's not really a big accomplishment because you literally just have to keep producing for a certain amount of time and you can be in that top 10%. But for other people, it shows this credibility and this excitement. And she was really excited about it. So hoorah for that. But that is not success, right? I mean, that's only a month and a half of work and then I achieved it. We're done. No, that's not how that's going to work. So what are those metrics that we actually need to be paying attention to? And I feel like this is something that I talk about quite often on the podcast, but I also understand that new people are not going to know this at all. But those of us who have been podcasting for months, years, maybe a decade, we need this reminder that we get to decide what success looks like and that it can look like many different things. So here are some examples of what success for you might look like. And this goes back to our goals. Make sure you go check out our goals episode. We'll also be having a goals workshop in December. There will be a replay if you're listening to this in the future. So make sure that you go check that out. That's going to really help you set up, okay, here are the goals that I want to achieve. And then what does success look like from there? So go back to the goals. But here are just some examples of ones that might work for you. If you are someone who is using your podcast to generate leads, then a conversion metric might be important. Like, okay, I have 10 qualified leads, and these could be people who went through your podcast and booked a call with you, or maybe they signed up for your program. Maybe they bought your low ticket offer, something that shows that they are a qualified lead. And having that understood of these are the people coming directly from the podcast. And if it is 10% of the listeners, then that is fantastic, right? So if you have 100 listeners and 10 of them decide to come over and check out your products or your services, then that's a win. Also understanding that 10% is a very high percentage, especially when it comes to podcast listeners, because they have a longer nurture time than, say, someone who is getting fed your ads on their social media platform or someone that you're engaging with via email. So just keep that in mind as you're kind of coming up with these goals for yourself. Another one could be that you want to be known as a thought leader and an authority in your space. And so you are creating content around your authority and around your expertise. If that's the case, then maybe don't have some guest episodes. Maybe focus really heavily on what you have to say. And then having a client say something like, I hired you because of your podcast, or I have you come speak because of your podcast. And I listened to this episode and I loved what it had to say. And I'd love for you to come speak to our community about it. That would be a great metric to track and to look at. Another one could be that you want to have a positive impact. I don't think that all of our goals necessarily have to be monetary. Yes, they can be, and there's nothing wrong with that. They're all equally great, but I also think that sometimes we put a lot of effort and time into the podcast and we think, okay, this has to give me a monetary result back. But if your goal is to create a positive impact with the conversations you're having or with the content that you're creating, then that is enough. And that can be enough and might shift depending on, say, you get to a point where maybe you need your podcast to be making income, or maybe you want to start exploring sponsors or affiliates or things like that. So with an impact podcast, you would look at a result like someone has sent you a message or sent you an email or a DM and said, I listened to your podcast and here's how it changed my life, or here are the things that I did that are positive or are impactful because of hearing your message. I remember I was looking at my podcast reviews and I don't tend to look at them, but I do check them out semi-regularly. And I was looking and I saw that someone had left a review on the podcast that said that they were able to use the content that I created in here to launch their own podcast. And then I saw her user profile. I was able to find her on social media. And then I sent her a voice message saying, oh my goodness, I'm so excited. I can't believe that you used this podcast as a way to launch your podcast. That is so exciting. And then she was able to tell me more. And then I invited her on to tell her story. And you can listen to that episode with Lauren. I'll make sure I have it linked in the show notes and the description. But that is just very full circle of a moment of just me creating content and being here for listeners and being here for the people that are choosing to spend this time with me, which if you're here, I appreciate you so much. And then being able to take that message and go out into the world and make a difference. And that just feels so stinking good. And so those are some ideas of some goals that you could create or some things that you could use as a kind of goalpost for podcast success. But say that you really do want to focus on those download numbers. How do you understand where you stack up against other podcasters? I'm going to give you 3 websites that I would love for you to check out. That is going to help you get a good idea of where you are stacked against these other podcasters. The first one is going to be listennotes.com. On Listen Notes, you'll be able to go in, you can type in your podcast name, and you'll be able to get your listen score, which tends to be lower than 40 for a lot of podcasts. So keep that in mind. And your global ranking, and they'll give you a percentage of that, along with the number of podcasts that they are calculating you against. So that's the first one, is Listen Notes. The second one is the Podcast Industry Report. And that one, the website is podmatch.com/report. Now, I use this as a way to understand the interview-based, and this is very specific to interview-based independent podcast hosts. That does not include people who are in a network. It doesn't include people who are doing solo shows. So keep that in mind as you're looking at their information. But what I love about this is that it gives the idea of how the industry is doing, like a pulse on the industry as a whole. It also gives you the percentage of podcasts that are currently active and what percentage actually gets high up in the milestones. And you can check out my milestone episode. That one is like how to celebrate when you're having a milestone episode. And those are 50 episodes, 100 episodes, 200 episodes, 300 episodes. So for example, I'm looking at October 2025's report, and it's saying that if you get to 100 podcast episodes, that you are part of 6.34% of podcasters that have gotten that far. Most people do not get that far, which is very, very sad that that doesn't really happen, and that approximately 399 podcasters quit every single day. And we see new podcasters coming up quite often. Like there's tons and tons of them. I just was on Threads earlier today and I saw at least 5 people that were like, hey, I'm launching a podcast next week, or hey, I launched a podcast, or new podcast. Podcasts are definitely something people are doing, but a lot of people are also quitting. And so your goal could simply be, hey, I'm successful because I've hit 100 episodes and I'm part of a tiny, tiny percentage of people who have been able to achieve that. And the third website that I want you to check out is called podstatus.com. Podstatus is a place where before we used to be able to go to Chartable, Chartable no longer has their charts, which is really frustrating. If you just want to check out one podcast, I'm pretty sure it's free. I do the $5 a month, which is for 5 podcasts. You can do $10 a month, which is for 12, or you could do $20 a month, which is for 25 podcasts. I don't think many of us need more than a few. And so I currently do not look at the charts for all of my clients. There are a select few that really care about that stuff. And I might increase it around the end of the year when I do reports for charting. But for the most part, I think $5 a month is perfectly acceptable if you have a few podcasts that you are trying to track. And most podcasters have a few podcasts that they're trying to track. And so that allows you to look at what the charts are, how you're ranking internationally, and to be able to see your reviews all in one space. So those are 3 websites that if you're like, look, I kind of want to get an idea of where I stack up against other podcasters. Maybe it's beyond downloads, maybe it's including downloads, then that is a place that you're going to want to look. I forgot to mention this before, but in the podcast industry report at podmatch.com/report, toward the bottom, you'll also be able to see, based on the number of downloads you get in the first 7 days of your episode being live, here's where you are in the top whatever percent for the downloads that you're getting. So you can check that out as well. And it's a lot lower than you might think. You could get 500 downloads in the first 7 days of your podcast going live and be in the top 10% of how much people are actually downloading your podcast. You could get 30 downloads in the first 7 days and you're doing better than 50% of the podcasters out there. So keep that in mind as you're kind of looking at the download numbers or feeling frustrated. I also recommend that you keep track once a month at most of your podcast stats. I am still working on the podcast dashboard that will be available for purchase. I want to say in the next few weeks, definitely by Black Friday. I'll have that. Maybe that will be my Black Friday thing. But it will have a Google sheet that will have all of the information you'll need. I'll have some video walkthroughs and where to find the information to put into these spreadsheets. And I'm finding that's a really great way for me to be able to keep track of what's going on with my clients and make decisions, kind of see those trends, because we're heading into the holiday season here when I'm recording this, and we are going to see downloads drop. And that is normal. And if we can see that from how our podcast performed last year, then that is a great way to see that. But we can't know that if we're not keeping track of it. All right. I want you to take 5 minutes today and I want you to write down what your definition of success is for your podcast. And if you're looking for ways to grow your podcast, to get it out there in front of more people, I want to invite you to the podcast workshop that I'm hosting on Friday. There is a replay available for anyone who's listening in the future, but it is on Friday, October 17th, and it is free to check out. It will be free for the replay as well for anyone who wants to see it in the future. And during that workshop, we're going to be talking through some strategic ways to market your podcast, some maybe out of box ways to do it as well, and really just giving you some options, especially if you're feeling disgruntled about social media at the moment. So that's a great place to be. All right. Until next time, happy podcasting.